The stories you're about to hear are based on true events shared by real people. For context, my best friend and I are both from London, but her family on her dad's side is from Scotland, so she goes there every summer for the entire summer. Last summer, I went to stay with her for 2 weeks at her granddad's house. Her granddad lives in the Scottish Highlands, like rural. The nearest town is at least a 40-minute drive away, and his house is the only building in the area. It backs onto a massive forest and faces a loch. It's really quite beautiful, but that's beside the point. My best friend's granddad, brother, aunt, and dad were going to the pub one evening. They invited us, which was, of course, a tempting offer. But we declined as we were excited at the prospect of having the house to ourselves, something that doesn't happen a lot given we are teenagers. So we decided to have a chill evening in and basically play house. Of course, if you've been to the Highlands, you know that a quick pint is anything but quick, and her family had been gone for some time by this point, about a few hours, when it was approaching 10 p.m. We were watching a movie in her living room when we heard a knock on the door. We reckoned maybe it was her family who had forgotten their key, so we went to answer. Her granddad's front door led into the conservatory, which then led to the actual front door of the house. So we made it to the conservatory door expecting her family, but instead, there was a man at the door. Slightly confused, we kind of just looked at him, waiting for him to say something, during which I had time to take in his appearance. There was something off about him, to say the least. He looked insane, bizarrely alert, and yet slightly scary. I can't quite explain it, but if you know, you know. He said his car had broken down and he needed to use the phone to call someone to pick him up. I looked out but couldn't see a car at all and said something to the effect of, "Where's your car?" He responded by explaining that he had broken down about 30 minutes down the road and had walked until he found a house. Given that, as I explained prior, my friend's granddad lived in a fairly remote area, this was plausible. With slight hesitation, my friend passed him her phone and said he could call who he needed to call and wait on the doorstep. He didn't accept the offer, however. Instead, he just kind of ignored it and started asking if there were any adults or parents in the house. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he was asking this because maybe he felt more comfortable sharing his predicament with adults rather than 2 teenage girls. We didn't know if we should tell him we were alone or not, because we would usually know better than that. But given the situation, we explained they were out but may be back soon. He started to look past us and into the house, and then began insisting we let him in so he could use the landline. At this point, we were more than suspicious, because if he wanted to call someone, why not just use my friend's phone? He was erratic, continuously insisting we let him in. At that point, my friend said he could either use her mobile or leave, but beyond that, there was nothing more we could do for him. He again insisted on coming into the house, so we just shut the door on him, locked it, and then locked the door to the actual house. Freaked out, we sat in her living room, trying to peep out the window and see if he'd gone. He lingered for a bit, looking into the windows, maybe looking for a way in, but then we saw him leave, though we couldn't make out what direction he went in. We were scared as fuck. To add fuel to the fire, my friend explained that the nearby town was pretty small and everyone in the area pretty much knew each other. She had never seen him in her life, which scared her, as she was acquainted with most of the town by now. We contemplated calling her dad, but since it had been about 30 minutes with no disruption, we just left it and continued with our night. Later on, her dog was getting restless and her family was still out, so we let her into the back garden. After about 5 minutes, we heard her barking, but it was too dark to see what she was barking at, so we put it down to it more than likely being a deer or goat, because that was usually the case. We called her in and went about our night. We realized her family probably wouldn't be back until the early hours, and instead of waiting for them, we decided to head up to bed. I went into the kitchen, which is at the back of the house, to get us some water when I heard someone shaking the handle of the back door, trying to get in. The thing is, it's a really old house, so I didn't exactly put all my faith in the door holding up against the weight of what I suspected to be a grown man. I screamed bloody murder, and my friend ran down the stairs. At this point, he was banging on the door like his life depended on it, and I swear to God, I felt my heart fall out my arsehole. My friend shouted back that she was going to call the police, which was a lie as she had taken our phones upstairs. But she thought it might deter him. Luckily, this seemed to scare him off. He stopped banging, and we heard his footsteps move further and further away until we couldn't hear them anymore. We were literally frozen in fear and couldn't even speak to each other. Then we heard the front door open and pretty much thought that was it for us. On instinct, my friend grabbed a knife and we hid in the pantry. You can only imagine our relief when we heard her dad call out for us saying they were back. We were absolutely dazed, and I'm sure they could tell. So we frantically asked them, "Did you see a car on your way here? A broken down car?" They responded they didn't, and I swear to God I could have shit myself then and there. This story occurred in 2011 when I was a 12-year-old girl traveling with my family as we moved to Canada. I'm French-German, and before the move, we lived in France. Over Christmas break, we went back home to visit family. We spent a week in France with my mom's side of the family before heading to Germany to see my dad's side. My mom had to fly back to Canada early for work, so I stayed in Germany with my dad and brother for a few more days. On the day of our flight, we checked in our bags, and the airline worker told us they could bump us up to business class. My mom traveled a lot for work and had accumulated a lot of miles. This is the only time this has ever happened to me, and unfortunately, my one-time business class experience was ruined by a creep. We got on the plane, and since we were upgraded at the last minute, we weren't seated together. The seats are all much more separated than in economy, but this is just to say that we were somewhat farther apart from each other on the plane. I was sitting farther back from my dad and brother, closer to the economy section. About an hour into the flight, the pilot announced over the intercom that several bathrooms on the plane were out of order. In a classic case of bathroom anxiety, I got up to use the toilet just in case. I went to the nearest working toilet, which was shared with economy. Two people were ahead of me in line, so I stood near the wall on the economy side of the hallway. That's when I noticed a man staring at me from a few rows down. The most striking details I remember about him were his thick black glasses and long, droopy facial features. He reminded me of a younger Woody Allen. I was a shy kid and always particularly scared of adult men. I wonder why, so I quickly looked away. A moment later, he got up and walked over. He asked if I was also waiting in line for the bathroom, and I nodded. Then he asked if I was sitting in economy. Being a naive 12-year-old, and a bit of a dumbass, I pointed toward my seat in business class. By this point, the people ahead of me had already gone in, and I was next in line. That's when he leaned closer and told me he had a trick for spying on people in airplane bathrooms. I didn't know how to react, so I gave an awkward laugh and stayed quiet. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he was fiddling with the occupied sign and told me he knew how to lift it to look inside. While he was talking, he had this crooked smile on the edge of his lips, which widened when he told me that once it was my turn, he would be able to see what I was doing. Before I could process what he had said, I heard the toilet flush. The person inside left, and the strange man made a go-on-in gesture with his arms. I locked the door and just stood there, wondering if he was actually able to see me. My bathroom anxiety took over, and I went to use the toilet anyway, all the while staring at the lock to see if it moved. Thankfully, nothing happened. When I stepped out, he was standing there, way too close to the door, and winked at me. I rushed back to my seat, put on my headphones, and continued watching my movie, trying to shake off the strange encounter. I felt something was wrong in my gut, but I wasn't able to articulate it, let alone recognize it, as fear or a sense of violation, even though I'm pretty sure he had no actual way of peeping on me. After some time, I started to feel better. I was excited when dinner was served. I expected business class meals to be 4-star gourmet cuisine. I was wrong. After dinner, the cabin went into sleep mode, meaning the lights were dimmed and most passengers either watched movies or slept. I was beginning to doze off when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked up to find the toilet creep smiling at me. He told me he was a photographer and that he thought I had a beautiful frame. He said he'd love to take some pictures of me. I just sat there, frozen in fear and confusion. Thankfully, at that moment, my dad decided to check on me and found a stranger talking to his 12-year-old daughter. The guy saw me look toward my dad, and before my dad could say anything, started trying to bullshit him. He told my dad he was a talent scout from a modeling agency and pulled out a business card to prove he was legit. My dad didn't buy any of it and told the toilet creep to leave me alone, or he'd call a flight attendant. After the guy left, I told my dad what had happened. We switched seats in case the man decided to come back, but even after switching, I was still on edge. For the next hour, I just sat there. No music, no movie, no games. I just stared ahead, and every once in a while, I turned back to where my dad was sitting to make sure the man hadn't tried to return. As I was drowning in anxiety, we got another message from the pilot. Apparently, there were more plane malfunctions and, among other things, only one working toilet was left. Even though we were already nearly halfway to Toronto, the plane ended up turning back to Munich. Now, I know this was just my terrified 12-year-old mind at work, but I started spiraling. Was he somehow at fault for the toilet malfunctions? Could he try to sabotage the plane by messing with the toilets? What if he tried to kidnap me after we landed? Thankfully, none of that happened, and on our way back to Munich, my dad checked on me frequently, which helped me feel safer. Once we landed, we were all ushered toward the nearest exits, and that's the last time I saw him, standing in line staring at me. I was next to my dad at my original seat, and my brother had come to our aisle, completely unaware of what had happened. When my dad saw the man, he told my brother and me to sit back down, and we waited until we were among the last people to exit the plane. As we left the airport, my dad made sure we took our time to avoid accidentally bumping into him. We were rebooked on a flight for the next day, no business class this time. We asked, but we failed, and spent the night at an airport hotel. After we got everything sorted, my dad called my mom, and they both tried to talk to me about what had happened, but I had nothing to say. I was confused, and I didn't know how to feel. I now know that this situation was threatening, and that my gut feeling was correct. But at the time, and for years afterward, I wondered if I had misunderstood the situation and was just dealing with a harmless idiot. I still wonder if this guy's toilet spying trick was real, or if he was just messing with a 12-year-old who didn't know better. And I don't want to imagine what could have happened if my dad hadn't been there. This happened around 2006 when I was in my mid-20s and my sister, the unfortunate main character in this story, had just turned 21. At the time, she and her boyfriend lived with my fiancé and me. On weekends, we'd usually go out to one of two bars that had karaoke, air hockey, etc. This particular night, we were at the bar farther out from where we lived in the city, a good half-hour drive. Everyone was drinking, socializing with familiar faces. It was one of those places with a lot of regulars, singing karaoke, nothing out of the ordinary. Except this time, my sister started hanging out with two older ladies who basically had a liquor store in their purses, and they were generous. I didn't realize it at the time, but since she tended to drink more than I did, this was a win for her. Less money spent on drinks. Unfortunately, she ended up far more hammered than usual. Toward the end of the night, around 1:45 a.m., she was really drunk. My fiancé, her boyfriend, and I were in a heated air hockey match, planning to leave as soon as it wrapped up. She walked up to us and said she was going out for a cigarette, nothing unusual, everyone did it, and would wait for us. About 5 minutes later, we paid our tab and went outside, but she wasn't on the porch where smokers usually gathered. That was weird, but not immediately alarming. We checked the back of the bar, the restrooms, and the large parking lot. It's worth noting this bar was located in a business park, surrounded by closed shops and a Mexican restaurant next door that had just shut for the night. We searched and asked everyone, friends and strangers, if they'd seen her. No one had. I even asked some workers from the restaurant who were sitting outside. They seemed nervous when they told me they hadn't seen her, but I didn't give it much thought until later. At that point, panic set in. I called her cell phone 15 times. Each went straight to voicemail. A little drunk and completely terrified, I took off my heels and started running down the highway searching for her. She had walked home drunk before, though never from somewhere this far out. My fiance and her boyfriend suggested we check the house. Maybe she caught a ride home. It seemed unlikely, but not impossible. We got home. She wasn't there. Just as we were about to head back and I was preparing to call the police, I got a call from the police department. They said they had my sister, that there had been an incident, and I needed to come immediately. We rushed to the station. They took us into a room where my sister was sitting. Her face was red from crying and bruises were beginning to show on her arms and chest. She explained that when she told us she was stepping outside, she thought we had said we were leaving, so she went to the car. After a few minutes, drunk and tired, she sat down against it to wait. Then a van pulled up. A young man asked for directions to somewhere. She walked over to help, and suddenly the back door flew open. Two other men grabbed her and threw her inside, and they drove off. They were rough, hitting her a few times and holding her down, saying they only wanted money. They snatched her purse, breaking the straps and rifled through it, but missed the 30 she had hidden. After driving around speaking in Spanish, which she didn't understand, they pulled out a gun, showed it to her, and blindfolded her with a bandana. They told her they'd let her go. They eventually drove to some woods near a neighborhood she didn't recognize. They opened the door, pushed her out, and told her to run. They warned her that if she removed the blindfold or looked back, they'd shoot. She ran and ran. Eventually, she pulled off the blindfold and came to a house. She pounded on the door, screaming for help. The police were called, picked her up, and that brings us back to the station, where I finally heard what I'd feared most. A report was filed. Police conducted a search and found the bandana she had ripped off. But since she was so drunk and traumatized, she couldn't give a clear description of the van, just that it was an older white model, or the men. Other than that, they were young Hispanic males. The investigation went nowhere. No cameras caught anything. We even had detectives in our home who said, "Look, we need the truth. If you got drunk and just went home with someone and don't want your boyfriend to find out, we will file charges on you." Aside from the bruises, the broken purse, and her obvious trauma, there wasn't anything solid to go on. It was a horrible experience. To this day, I'm still convinced someone at that restaurant knew something. Their behavior was too suspicious, but police never found a connection. In the end, the men were never caught. Eventually, we moved on, literally to different states. Now, it's just a horrifying story in our past. It still makes me sick thinking about what could have happened, but thankfully didn't. Be safe out there, kids.